The service beacons are player-generated missions, and we wanted to give the players the opportunity to interact with each other on a level that most MMOs don't really do. You know, a lot of them have PvP, but this is like, I've taken a mission that's too big for me to do, so I want to give other people an opportunity to help me with that.
At a conceptual level, the service beacon is a mechanism that allows players that want something to easily form a short-term contract with others that want to provide it. This is a much more important feature than it might initially appear because it effectively means that we're leveraging the player base to supplement and enhance the scripted and systemic content that's available within the game, while at the same time, because other players are involved, injecting a very unpredictable element that's ultimately going to result in a lot of very unique gameplay experiences. Just as importantly, by constantly pushing players together when they've got compatible interests, the service beacon is going to help foster the creation of relationships within the community, and that in turn will lead to the formation of a lot of new friendships, alliances, and in the case of deals gone bad, sometimes even vendettas. So 3.1 laid the architectural framework for all of this functionality and introduced the first couple of beacons, and you can now hire other players to defend you or ask them to transport you wherever you want to go. But this is really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of where we want to take this system. We're aiming to push it a lot farther in the future.
You go in through the exact same way that you would do any other mission. You open up your mission manager. You have a beacons tab, so if you want to generate a new beacon for somebody else to take, you need a service, then you can go there and create a new beacon. Select the beacon type, fill out the parameters. It's really simple right now. Fill out how much money you're willing to pay. Either combat assistance is by the minute, or the personal transport is just a one lump sum payment, and create a beacon. And you can respond to it directly through that, or you can actually go into the mission manager and go into the general tab, and other players' missions show up under a beacon header in there.
For the UI side, we figured it made the most sense to utilize the existing mission manager screen to implement these new features. So along with our mobiGlas overhaul that we did to expand the amount of real estate the mobiGlas took up on the screen, we factored in the service beacon creation screen.
Our goal with the UI on the beacon creation screen was that it would be fairly kind of self-apparent as to how the player would interact with it. There were very few pieces of information needed for the player. They needed to know what kind of beacon they'd want to create, and then based on that, other elements would turn on. In this case, I want to go somewhere. Well, where do you want to go? We need to give that to the player. If you're wanting combat assistance, that information is not needed, so we would need to turn that on and off as applicable, and then validate everything is correct, that you have a price, you have a reputation request, you have a location, and then send that off to the code. So I had to lay out the different drop downs, make sure that they would work out correctly there, just so that when you look at it, we don't have to do a tutorial, we don't have to explain how this works. You see it, it makes sense, and you're able to just run with it. That was the core goal of the way we ended up setting up the UI. Also making sure we're going to have additional beacons going forward. And when we do that, we want this system to be able to easily adapt, add in or change out modules in there as needed, and just be able to punch these out from a UI standpoint relatively quickly compared to the initial framework setup.
So in designing the service beacon system, we implemented a rating system where players can be rated both on how they provide the contract and how they actually execute the contract. So both sides. Also, players are rated on a per contract type basis. So essentially, for example, you are very good at doing personal transport type of contracts. However, you may not be so good at combat. So you have different ratings for both of those. So it doesn't make sense to have kind of like this overall rating, because you could be really good at one thing but not so good at another. And so we have that split out. So as a requester of contracts, you are able to specify what the minimum rating is for people to accept your contracts. So a person with a 2-star rating won't be able to accept your contract if you specified that as 3 or 4 stars. So right now you can't, as a requester of contracts, as a person who configures a contract, you can't necessarily see the rating of the person who's accepted the contract. As a As a player who accepts contracts, you are able to see what your rating is compared to what the minimum rating of the contract is. So contracts that are higher than your rating won't show up in the mission manager. So you can't see a 4-star contract if you're rated at only 3 stars.
Another thing we had to set up is the missions need to show up to other players. So once I create the beacon, it gets broadcasted out and another player would see it show up on their mobiGlas. Through the existing mission system, we already have a lot of that happening, but we just needed to expand that to allow these player-created missions to also be picked up and broadcasted to the rest of the mission screen, which is why when you go in, you can see when you go to the Beacons tab, it shows other created missions that the player is able to select and are the ones you've created to cancel out. And then in active or available missions, you can see which missions players have created and you can accept those just as though it was any other mission. So we're using the players' ingrained knowledge of how the system already works and letting that drive how they interact with this.
Right now, our existing notification system is a little bit rudimentary. It only handles single strings, and there's just a simple queue for those messages. But later down the line, we want to introduce designers the control to be able to push in notifications that require an accept or decline action, or a mission objective which has a timer. And different types of notifications would have different ways of being presented on the screen and transitioning off the screen to be able to visually associate with other HUD elements. So, for instance, a mission objective that comes on would flash on the screen for maybe a second, and then that would tuck away in the direction of where you have a persistent objective list on your HUD. So we want to have more visual association with those notifications so it's easier to see what they apply to, basically expanding the capability of the notification system so we don't have to have a hacked, totally separate layer of UI. It can all just factor in the same thing.
When we created the personal contract beacon and the combat assist beacon, we had to make different game rules to make those things work. So we had to think about the logic that needed to be implemented, and what I mean by that is that what does it mean to be successfully transported from one location to another? I need to be picked up, I need to be detected within the bounds of somebody else's ship, I need to be successfully landed at the destination that I chose. And so we want to try and make it so that these things are players can't exploit the system. So as we move forward, we're going to make it so, combat assist, you actually have to be within a certain range of somebody in order to be considered, assisting them. If you're across the universe, you're not really helping me out, right? So as we go through these different contract types and the different beacon types, we really need to make sure that we catch all of these edge cases and try and put in some game logic that really focuses on removing those exploits from the system. So tailoring each mission and each beacon type to what they really need and how to get those exploits out. That's really important to us. So it really enhances the player experience, and it gets rid of some of the trolling that can happen in some of the MMOs that you see out there.
The service beacons are part of a new class of features that we're making in the game that are really leveraging the services technology that we're writing for the back end. And what this allows us to do is write game features that can communicate with players that will be in the future across several server instances. And this is a requirement as we look towards a feature where the game is actually running in a server mesh. So not the entire universe or solar system even is running on one server. Instead, we have a mesh of servers that are kind of running the logic and simulation for regions of the space. So because of that, we need to write some kind of infrastructure that allows game flow to occur even with players that are across these different server nodes and when they may traverse the bounds of the different server nodes. And so this adds some interesting complexity to the development process, but also a lot of excitement, I think, as well.
The interface for the service beacon is going to gradually evolve in a number of different ways. Cosmetically, notifications are going to become diegetic so that the The presentation of the information doesn't rip you out of the game. Reputational feedback, that's going to expand from a simple good, bad rating to a more flexible 5-star system that will allow you to more precisely rate the other party. We're also going to add support for hotkeys so that you can do things like quickly and easily dispatch calls for combat assistance when you're under attack and doing everything you can to evade enemy fire. Now, you can already limit your interactions with other players based upon their reputation, and we're going to expand that system to allow you to limit your dealings to just those players that are friends or members of select organizations. One of the most interesting upcoming features to me, though, is going to be the ability of the system to record a variety of stats relating to the provider's performance and give you that feedback in real time. So combat escorts will have things like their hit ratio and kill percentage tracked. Personal transports will record things like elapsed time and average speed, and fuel suppliers will have their transfer efficiency monitored. This information will allow you, the employer, to more effectively determine when and whether to terminate a contract, as well as what kind of reputational feedback you eventually want to give.
Right now, the service beacons are just factored into one category that you see on the mission screen. And to actually create that beacon, to create a player-generated mission, we implemented a new tab specifically for service beacons, in which you are able to view all of your beacons that you have created previously, and you are able to have a form to create a beacon as well. So right now, it's very basic. You can specify the type of contract, basically. There's only 2 types at the moment, and you're able to specify a location and a price. However, later down the line, we want to massively extend this to be able to configure it in various ways. So you can set up logic like, pay a certain amount if they've done a certain task or whatever. So there's going to be a much more robust functionality later down the road for creating contracts.
We're going to expand the system to allow some contract types to support multiple providers. So for example, if you want a combat escort to tag along and protect your valuable cargo as you make a run through a particularly dangerous area of space, you'll be able to specify how many hire slots are available for that particular job, with each provider working as an independent contractor towards that common goal. Another big change is that NPCs are going to gain the ability to interface to the service beacon. And what this means is that over on the employer side, this is going to help us inject a lot more life into the world. So based upon what the back-end simulation dictates, we'll be able to ensure that a given area always has the right mixture and quantity of contract jobs on offer, and players can elect to respond to or ignore those opportunities however they see fit. And over on the provider side, NPCs will do their own mental calculus to determine whether the reward offered justifies the effort and expense, and if so, then they'll compete with players for those opportunities. And what this means in the long term is that we'll be able to guide prices for these jobs into a reasonable range, and also ensure that we've got the ability to fill in the gaps with an NPC when players aren't willing to step up, perhaps because there aren't any in that area, or maybe because they're just busy doing something else. We're currently in the process of working on several new types of contracts, with escort slated to be the next one out of the gate. And it's going to combine regular payments with quantum linking so that you can travel anywhere as a group. Another interesting one is assassination, which is going to allow you to put a price on someone's head and introduce the concept of multiple providers vying for a single prize. The point of interest beacon is going to take things in a slightly different direction and allow information you've discovered, such as the location of a derelict ship that can be salvaged, or a rich deposit of ore that can be mined, to be shared or sold to others. Refuel and repair, those will come along a bit later, along with the associated gameplay and eventually a number of other contract types.
It's the beginning of the system, and it should be. Players are already talking about it and having fun with it, so it's pretty exciting.